Hello. We're in the book of Isaiah today. If you have your Old Testament on you, go ahead and open up to Isaiah chapter 1. And in this segment, we'll be covering chapters 1 through 6 of the book of Isaiah. As we discussed last week and on the syllabus, part of your assignment was to read chapters 1 through 6 of Isaiah. And you'll do 7 through 12 in preparation for next week. We don't have time, obviously, with 66 chapters to read all of this in class verse by verse, and so I'm trusting that you've done the homework in reading the text before coming to class, and now we'll fill out the workbook and make the prominent emphatic points along the way. So if you have your Old Testament, open up to Isaiah chapter 1, and we'll start from verse 1. You know, it says the vision of Isaiah, son of Amoz, and it's concerning Judah and Jerusalem, which he saw during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. And if you have the workbook on you, as we discussed last week, we find the historical sketch of the book of Isaiah in our workbook. I've got the dates there for us. Uzziah, 767 to 750. Jotham, 750 to 735. Ahaz, 735 to 715. And Hezekiah, 715 to 686. So we're looking at the years 767 to 750. Isaiah 6 is going to say that's when it's the death of Uzziah, 750 BC, that he gets his prophetic call, Isaiah chapter 6. Well, Isaiah chapter 1 starts out and gives us an introduction kind of over the whole book of Isaiah. All 66 chapters fall in this historical time frame. Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. So we're looking at the years 767 to 686 is when Isaiah functions. Now, it's highly possible that he actually lived into the days of Manasseh. Tradition would state that Manasseh had a wicked king. You read 2 Chronicles 33, and he's the one who just ravages Israel. Tradition has it that he shoved Isaiah the prophet into a log and cut him into two. Tough to say if that happened or not, but that's the tradition that states what happened to Isaiah. So anyway, it's highly possible that he lived into the days of Manasseh as well. We'll see in Isaiah chapters 56 and 57 some heinous atrocities that were going on, and it definitely reflects the days of Jotham, Manasseh rather, son of Hezekiah. So it's highly possible, even though the superscription, the introduction here in Isaiah 1:1 says Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, it's highly possible that he even lives on into the days of Manasseh as well. And I'll argue why I think that is in Isaiah 36 and 37, where there's a notation after Hezekiah during the days of Manasseh. All right, let's take a look at 1:1 then. If you have the workbook, and you should have the workbook in front of you, number 1, it is impossible to speak with any certainty about when Isaiah received this oracle. We talked a little bit about that in the introduction last week. These oracles are cataloged by themes. It's not chronological, and we Westerners really don't like that. But the book of Isaiah is cataloged by themes, and so it's all these different oracles that get packaged together by Isaiah and perhaps some of his disciples who helped him on this stuff. But nonetheless, the book is a catalog. It's an anthology. And so we're going to find oracles here right out of the gate, Isaiah chapter 1, that very well could be spanning all the way from 767 to 686. And it could just be a conglomeration of oracles packed into that. This could function, Isaiah chapter 1 could function as just an overview to the whole era in which Isaiah lived. So it's impossible to speak with any certainty about when Isaiah received this particular oracle or oracles. The second thing on number 1, B, the historical background of the chapter. It is tough to look at Isaiah chapter 1 and say, oh, this looks like this period or this looks like that period. It reflects perhaps an entire era of Isaiah, multiple kings, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. And then we've got this on the workbook. The picture here is intended to be a composite picture of Judah during the time of the prophet. I think that's right. So your blanks on number 1, We can't speak with certainty about when Isaiah received this oracle or oracles. And then B, it's impossible to talk about the historical background that lays behind this particular chapter. The picture, the chapter is probably a composite picture of Judah, southern Israel, during the entire ministry, prophetic ministry of Isaiah the prophet. And I've got some notes there at the end, the references, where it looks like maybe we've got some historical background there packaged in. 2 Kings 19, 2 Chronicles 26. All right, number 2. It is probable that Isaiah also prophesies during a co-regency between Hezekiah and his son. A co-regency. Co-regency. R-E-G-E-N-C-Y. In the days of not just Israel, but even like if you read Daniel chapter 5 and it talks about Belshazzar, the boss king in that day was actually Nabonidus. And Nabonidus had a son, Belshazzar, who was the second in command. That's why when Belshazzar's in the court there and Nabonidus is off on a voyage, that's why it says in Daniel chapter 5, it says that if anybody could interpret that writing on the wall, mene, mene, tekel, upharsin, Daniel chapter 5, about 24 through 31, if anybody could interpret that, he had promised him to be given various trinkets, gold around his neck, a robe, and then it says he would be the third ruler in the kingdom. Why was Belshazzar in Daniel chapter 5 promising the third place in the kingdom? Why not the second in command? It's because he's second in command. His father Nabonidus is number 1. He's reigning alongside Nabonidus, Belshazzar is, so he promises to whomever can interpret the writing. Well, this is all over the Old Testament. I think it's all over the book of Isaiah. Hezekiah, there's a big debate about Hezekiah. Does he start his reign in 727 or does he start his reign in 715? By my estimation, I think he started out in 727, but he becomes sole ruler. Not a co-regent king, but a sole ruler in 715. That's the way it looks best. And I think there are some other individuals, maybe John Bright and John Gray, I think, maybe Edwin Thiel's book, I have argued all of this out. The dates of not just the Hebrew kings, but the Assyrians and the Egyptians as well. Co-regency, this is my argument. Co-regency was a common thing. It was a common practice in that day. And so it looks quite possible that Isaiah even prophesies during the days of Manasseh. Whether or not he's sole ruler, Manasseh is sole ruler, is quite irrelevant. It looks like, though, in Isaiah chapter 37, if you glance over at Isaiah 37 there at the end of the chapter, this is after Hezekiah hits his knees, prays to God, is spared not only his life, but also from the Assyrian invaders, the 185,000 Assyrians. That death angel goes out in the middle of the night and kills them. Well, in Isaiah chapter 37, we have this remark. It says in 37:36, this is Isaiah 37 and verse 36, the angel of the Lord went out, struck the 185,000 Assyrians. Verse 37, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departs. He goes back to Assyria. And in Isaiah 37, verse 38, Sennacherib was worshiping in the house of Nisroch, his god, and Adramelech and Sharezer, his sons, killed him with the sword, and they escaped into the land of Ararat. Now watch this. This is 37, verse 38. Isaiah 37, verse 38. And Esarhaddon, his son, became king in his place. All right, Esarhaddon is mentioned in the book of Isaiah. Sure is. Take a look now at your introduction sheets in your workbook. Go back a page in your workbook and look at this. We have the list of dates for the Assyrian kings here. And it says of Esarhaddon, he reigns from 681 to 669. So I'm back in the introduction in our workbook. 681 to 669. Okay. Glance across that column there on number 20 in your introduction, and you see Manasseh. He reigns from 697 to 642. The fact that Esarhaddon is mentioned in Isaiah 37 and verse 38 suggests that Isaiah lived into the days of Esarhaddon. Guess who that would put as the king in such a day? It'd be Manasseh. So maybe, go back to your workbook, chapter 1, maybe Isaiah even works not just into the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, but even into the days of Manasseh. All right, let's go on to the next section. And so that's the superscription. That's the incipit at the start of the book. That's the introduction. We move now into Isaiah chapter 1, verses 2 through 9. And this is the nation in court. There are several characters here: Isaiah, God, the nation. And if you look closely at the language here, it's court, legal language. It says as much. In Isaiah chapter 1, in verses 2 through 9, you've got these kinds of words. Listen, O heavens and earth. Hear, the Lord speaks. And then it's going to talk about them being weighed, verse 4. And basically the whole thing is going to be a verdict rendered against the nation by God. Take a look at number 3 in your workbook then. The scene here is delivered as a covenant lawsuit. God is presented as plaintiff. And then here are your blanks on number 3. Judge and jury. He calls in 1:2 heaven and earth as witnesses against Israel, the nation. So God is plaintiff, and then here are your blanks, number 3, judge and jury. Isaiah is presented as God's lawyer. That's your blank on number 3. Isaiah is presented as God's lawyer. Judah, southern Israel, is the defendant. They're on trial. God is calling heaven and earth against them, and he's calling heaven and earth against them as, here's your next blank, witnesses. Judah is the defendant. Heavens and earth are called in as witnesses. All right, take a look at verse 4. It talks about their masters. It talks about the people. This is verse 3 rather. A donkey, its master's manger. Master is from the word Baal. The god, Baal, and may indicate, number 1, Israel's real place or loyalty. Maybe they were involved in Canaanite Baalism. More on that in Isaiah 56 and 57. Sure looks that way. Sure looks that way. When you read Isaiah 56 and 57, you can't help but recognize Israel, Judah, had gotten involved in Canaanite idolatry, Baalism. All right? And number 2, this is blank on number 4. Number 2, serve as an insult against her idolatry. God is basically saying in 1:3 of Isaiah, you're ignorant, you don't understand, and you're worshiping idols, and God insults them with such a metaphor, calls them an ignorant ox or donkey. An ox knows its owner, donkey knows its master, but Israel doesn't know who it really serves, she really serves, should be Almighty God. Number 5, the people are said to have despised or provoked the Holy One of Israel. That's a common depiction of God in Isaiah. He is the Holy One of Israel. And P.T. Forsyth, if he wasn't right, he was close to right, said that the primary adjective we should be using to describe God is he is holy. That is, if we could draw a picture of God and we'd say he's omnipresent and he's omnipotent and he's omnibenevolent and the rest, loving, just, fair, etc. All of those words that we'd put to describe God. Forsyth said that the word we ought to put above the whole circle to talk about God, if we could just sum him up in one word, was God is holy. If he's not right, he's close to right. We'd say God is love, and that'd pretty well get it too. Bible says that, 1 John chapter 4. But if we put up at the top, God is holy, we'd get the good idea as well. Now, holiness brings with it a number of things. We don't have time to unpack that. But in Isaiah, we're going to see God constantly being depicted as the Holy One of Israel. And that brings with it a number of connotations, which we'll briefly talk about as we study this book together. He's the Holy One of Israel. Number 6, the desolation. If you look at verses 7 through 9, it says, the land is desolate, the cities are burned with fire, the fields, strangers are devouring them in your presence. It is desolation, overthrown by strangers. The daughter of Zion is left like a shelter in a vineyard. It's a besieged city. And it says in verse 9, God left them a few survivors. He left a small remnant. And if he hadn't left a remnant or survivors, the nation would be like Sodom and Gomorrah. That's what 1:9 says. Now, the desolation is probably, so I said earlier that we couldn't get the historical situation or the historical background for sure, and that's true, but it looks like it might be Sennacherib's invasion. So put that down on number 6. The desolation is thought to be Sennacheribs. Senna. Senna. Cherib apostrophe S. Senna. Cherib apostrophe S. Sennacherib's desolation. You know, they have this prism. You need to look this up. If I were in class with you, I'd throw it on the television screen, and it wouldn't be too much trouble for me to show you a picture of the Taylor prism. You need to look at that, the Taylor prism or the Taylor cylinder. And I've got the notes there in the workbook. You can read about it in J.B. Pritchard's Ancient Near Eastern Texts 3, if you're interested in having all of those pagan texts written by these pagan kings as they were written in things like Akkadian and etched into the cylinder and then baked. It was clay. They etched it into the clay and then they baked it. And next thing you know, this clay became a tablet, hardened tablet, and it had Akkadian on it or whatever the language was. And the Taylor prism has in there, and I've got the documentation as it's presented in J.B. Pritchard's Ancient Near Eastern Texts 3. It says of Sennacherib's invasion that he took 200,150 captives from Israel, Judah. 200,150 captives. And it says that he leveled a desolation against Israel and Judah of 46 cities. 46 cities. 200,150 captives. What's my point? If we were to look at a map, well, let me show you one. Let me show you a map. If we were to look at a map, let me see if I can find a marker here. If we were to look at, well, that's no good. I've got scrap paper and you can see through it, can't you? Let's do this. If you look at this map here, Assyria is way off to the east. And Jerusalem, of course, you've got the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River and then the Dead Sea down here. Jerusalem lays off just to the west of all of that. Jordan River, Dead Sea. Assyria is way off here to the northeast. And Assyria is going to make an invasion coming like this, probably around the Fertile Crescent. It's where their water is. It's just like Abraham did it. And he comes down, Sennacherib with his 185,000 Assyrians, comes down towards Jerusalem. We're going to read about this later on in the book of Isaiah, chapters 36 through 39. Sennacherib's invasion comes from the northeast, comes to the west, and comes down the Fertile Crescent. And along the way, he's taking 200,150 captives and leveling 46 villages, cities of the Israelites, Judeans. All right. That's Sennacherib's invasion. It looks like the desolation talked about in verses 7 through 9 is probably the desolation rendered by Sennacherib and the Assyrians. What years? Close to 701. Probably close to the year 701. All right, take a look at this then. Number 7. God is said to have left the people of Judah and Israel, Judah primarily, but Israel too, a remnant. A remnant. Now, in some cases, this is important, and it's on number 7. You can follow along on the workbook on number 7. In some cases, the group, the remnant, is called the servant. The servant, Isaiah 49. We'll talk more about that when we get to Isaiah 40 through 55, which is a block. Isaiah 40 through 55 is one big block, and a major complex motif figure in those chapters, in that block, is the servant in Isaiah, the suffering servant. We'll talk about that figure, cryptic figure, more when we get to Isaiah 40 through 55. But the remnant is called the servant in Isaiah 49, 3 through 6. But these here are survivors. Survivors. Are they righteous survivors? Sometimes the text speaks of the righteous remnant. Sometimes the text just talks about physical survivors, not commenting on whether or not they're righteous, faithful people. It just says that they still lived beyond the invasion of the Assyrians. And we have to make a distinction. Here, it just simply says, unless the Lord left us survivors, a remnant, I don't think it's as much a remark about faith here as much as it's just saying God left us a few people laying behind. He spared us a few. If God hadn't done that, we would have completely been desolated like Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, when you look at Romans, Paul takes these kinds of texts and motifs, the remnant, and gives it an application to say there's a remnant of faith. Romans chapter 9, and it's really Paul's whole argument in Romans 9 through 11. God has used and spared the nation, and it is a people of faith that are the real people of God. The real Jew, so says Paul in Romans 2, Romans 9, and Romans 11. The whole argument of Romans, really. Paul says the real Jew is a Jew of faith. And Paul takes texts like this to say, just because you're Jewish ethnically, physically, doesn't carry any weight with whether or not God has elected you for salvation. The real Jew, so says Paul in his whole Romans, but especially in chapters 2, 9, and 11, 9, 10, and 11, Paul says the real Jew is a Jew living by faith. And so he says there's Israel, which is all of physical Israel, but inside of physical Israel you have a group, a specialized group, and those are Israelites. They're physical Israelites. Oh, yes, they are. But they're faithful Israelites, people like Moses, people like David, people like Zacharias and Elizabeth. And so Paul sees an Israel, the real Israel of God, the faithful Israel, within physical Israel. And that's the same way he's talking about it in Galatians chapter 6 and verse 16 when he talks about the Israel of God. They're physical Jews. There's not a text in your New Testament that says that a physical Gentile becomes a spiritual Jew. The text doesn't say that. I'm sorry, but no, it does not. Romans 2 doesn't say it. Romans 9 doesn't say it. Romans 11 doesn't say it. When Paul talks about the real Israel, he's still talking about physical Israelites. But he's talking about physical Israelites who are faithful Israelites. And he takes texts like this in Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 9 to make his argument that way. All right, let's move on to the next section. In Isaiah chapter 1, we hit verses 10 through 20. And what we see here is outward, external religion, but divine disgust. And what I mean by that is they're still going to church. They're still dropping their $100 contribution into the plate on Sunday morning. I'm modernizing, of course. They're still sitting in a church pew. They're still humming the songs along. They're still listening to the sermon. They still take that sip of juice and eat that cracker. But their heart is far from God. In their day, it's idolatry. They're still going to church, but they're idolatrous. It gets even worse than that. They're still going to church, going to the temple, taking their sacrifices, offering them before God. But we hear the verdict rendered here as God calls them, verse 13, worthless offerings. He says that he's had enough of their burnt offerings and cows, cattle, bulls, lambs, goats, 111. He says in verse 14 that he hates their observations, their worship. He hates their new moons and their appointed feasts. He's weary of them, verse 14. And he says, when you pray to me, I don't listen, verse 15. I hide my eyes from you. He says that they're guilty in that their hands are covered with blood. And so all of that's in verses 10 through 15. The sin of this section, this is number 8 in your workbook now, is number 1, to God. Oh, they are sinning by presenting themselves to God? That's what the text says. It isn't idolatry. They were idolatrous, but that's not what this text is really grilling them for. They were idolatrous. We will see in Isaiah 56 and 57, they were practicing Canaanite Baalism. And we'll see it in other places as well. They were idolatrous, but in this context, he's not hitting them for idolatry. That's not his primary focus anyway. His primary focus here is to say that they're presenting themselves to God, but they're somehow doing that wrongly. Number 2, it consists of righteous acts. Don't misunderstand here. God's not against the sacrificial system. He set it up for pity's sake. Don't misunderstand. He's not against the new moons and the Sabbath days. He set those up too. What's God against? He's not against prayer. He set that up as well. What's God against then? Oh, something else. Number 3, what they're doing consists of genuine effort. They're giving their work. They're putting their time, effort, money, energy. They're putting that into it. Don't misunderstand. Number 4, these sins can be remitted They can be handled. That's where the next verses, 16 through 18, is going to take us. God's going to say, get it right. Wash yourselves. Cleanse yourselves. Make yourselves white as snow. That's what he's going to say in verse 18. But here's the interesting thing. While they are to God, the sins are to God, consists of righteous acts. These are scriptural acts. He ordained them. God put them together. They consist of genuine effort. They do take work. And number 4, they can be remitted. They're not unpardonable. While we see all of that, the real problem has to do with heart. Has to do with attitude. Later on in the book of Isaiah 29, he's going to say, my, these people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And this is Hayes. This is Richard Hayes now, who rightly says, God talk is cheap. And that's what the people of this day were doing. They were saying all of the right things, doing all of the right things, going to church, doing it all right. But with the heart distant from God, this kind of religion was vain or worthless. Not a shock then that we hear Jesus 700 years later after Isaiah saying the same thing Isaiah was saying. He's quoting Isaiah in a number of ways. And Jesus takes Isaiah's text and says this same thing that was happening in Isaiah's day is now being fulfilled again. It's happening again right here before our eyes. That's what Jesus is doing with Isaiah in a lot of ways. That's what Isaiah is saying here in chapter 1. They're going to synagogue or the temple, offering their cattle, going to the new moon festival, the Sabbath day. All of that they're doing right, but somehow they're still wrong. God help us when we are mechanically right, but heartlessly wrong. And that's part of what's going on in Isaiah 2. If we can't learn a lesson from their worship and how they approached God, I don't know that we're going to do much better. One of you needs to preach a sermon on this. One of you needs to do Isaiah 1, 10 and following, and talk about some of these 4 points that we bring out in number 8, and talk about our worship in the New Testament Church of Christ, the one that he built, the one that he died for. Same problems, new faces. All right, number 9. The historical situation looks like it could be, in this part of the oracle, during Jotham's day, and I've got 2 Chronicles 27. You'd want to read that, 2 Chronicles 27, 1 through 6. But it could be during Hezekiah's day, after the passing of the Assyrian crisis. Tough to say for sure. Could be during Jotham's day, could be during Hezekiah's day. Just tough to say. Number 10. Some of the cross-references that would help shade in the situation are, and I've got these for you, if you like to make notes in your Bible, and you need to want to make notes in your Bible, you'd want to look at Micah 6, Amos 4, Isaiah 65, Isaiah 59, Psalm 24, Psalm 51, and Jeremiah 4. A lot of similar rhetoric here. Give it a look, especially the Micah texts. Micah and Isaiah are contemporary prophets. Hosea, Micah, Isaiah, and Amos are all working around the same time. Hosea, Micah, Amos, those are your 3 minor prophets, and Isaiah, major prophet. They all work about the same time, those 4 guys do. So it's not shocking that we hear them crossing over with the same critique or criticism of the nation. Some of those guys work up north. Isaiah works down south in the heart of Jerusalem. He's a city boy, and looks like he might even be related to the royal family. He has an inner, he's in the inner circle, we might say, of the officials in Jerusalem. Saw some of that maybe in the introduction, I think. All right, take a look at number 10. Some of the cross-references then that I've got here for us shade in what's going on in Isaiah 1. And the point that's being made, this is verse 15 now, in your workbook number 10, God does not hear the heartless, hypocritical, rebellious worshiper. Worshiper is your blank on number 10. Have I made that point enough? You can be a worshiper of God and do it wrongly. If you look at Genesis chapter 4, that's Cain. The Bible says in 1 John chapter 3 and verse 12, he was evil. His deeds were evil. It doesn't say why Cain was wrong. Some of us have speculated and said, well, it was because his worship was of the ground where Abel's was from the flock. But that's not entirely wrong. Even the Mosaic Law has provision made for offerings from the ground. wine offerings, drink offerings, meal, grain offerings. Those are in the Old Testament too, Mosaic code. Cain's not under that. Maybe that was a sufficient offering style, mechanically that is. But something he did was wrong. Maybe it wasn't heartful, or maybe it wasn't from faith. Tough to say. So maybe it should have been a burnt offering. Maybe it was with the wrong attitude. Maybe he didn't give his best. You know, what if Cain gave an appropriate offering mechanically, and that it was fine to give a grain offering from the ground, or a drink offering, and maybe he gave it, quote unquote, from the heart, you might say, but then that'd raise a question. Could it really be from the heart if it's not his best? Doesn't say why Cain was wrong. But I think we're getting close to something like that in Isaiah chapter 1. They're worshiping God, but something's missing, even being mechanically right. I wonder if that's not a problem for us today. Haven't I made that point? One of you guys needs to preach this. All right. Number 11. Legal terms. We pointed this out earlier in Isaiah 1. Legal terms such as seeking justice, verse 17, or pleading for the widow. Put those in your blanks on number 11. Seeking justice or pleading for the widow, along with the call for reasoning together, verse 18. Call that former, earlier oracle, chapter 1 and verse 2, to mind again. Yeah, it's court language. It's legal language. God's wanting justice, justice for the widow, justice for the orphan, rebuke of those who are ruthless or vicious. And the text says that we need to reason these things out, 1:18. If we didn't know any better, we'd think that Isaiah just wrote about something that happened yesterday. Yeah. I don't know that the politics of 2,700 years ago are altogether too different from the politics of yesterday, or today, or tomorrow. You'd really want to look at 1:17, seeking justice, defending the orphan and widow. You'd really want to look at Micah 6:6-8 on that. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with his God? Micah 6. Look at 6-8. Look at Micah 2. See if Micah and Isaiah aren't saying much the same thing. We'll see that again in the next chapter as well. Isaiah 2 is really going to line up nicely with Micah 4 in a lot of ways. Okay, next section. In Isaiah chapter 1, 21-31, we start to look at the harlot, the city, Jerusalem, ouch, and her salvation through suffering. There's an interesting point. God saves people through suffering. More on that later. Number 12. If you haven't taken 2 Corinthians with me, you will, Lord willing, and we'll wear that theme out in 2 Corinthians. The reason for evil, pain, and suffering. And I think we've got a third-year class on that as well. Number 12. The faithful city, Jerusalem, is said to have become an harlot. Verse 21. It says that the faithful city's become a harlot. Oh, the nations, the Jews love to hear the nations called that kind of thing. Ezekiel, 27, calls Tyre the prostitute. Revelation 18 talks about the prostitute, Rome. We'll take Revelation together next quarter, I reckon. It's Rome. Here, they wouldn't have liked to hear. It was fine to call the pagan cities a prostitute. But here, Isaiah's talking about God's people. God's physical nation, Israel, had become a prostitute, a harlot. That's what the text says. Number 13. God, why? Same reason we just read. Their worship has become absolutely prostituted. It's not towards God. All right. Number 13. God is called again the mighty or the holy one of Israel. Called the mighty one here. Verse 24. That word mighty or strong, the Lord of hosts, has to do with his being a God of war. Has to do with him being strong, ready to step in and do what's right for humanity. And so we see that in verse 13. God is called the Mighty One of Israel. I've got some references for you there. Number 14. At the end of the whole exilic punishment, Israel would be redeemed. This is verse 26 now. And retitled as the city of righteousness. Put that on number 14's blanks. When the whole thing's done, when the dust has settled, God is going to call her. This is important for us, I think. Verse 26. The city of righteousness, a faithful city. Let me show you a sketch here again. You're going to hear me talk about the Assyrian-Babylonian exile. Assyria moves in, really, in the year 722. And we may have talked about this in the introduction, in the historical sketch. Assyria moves in 722. Assyria is surrounding the city of Jerusalem in the days of Hezekiah. Sennacherib's about to take it. God spares them. 185,000 Assyrians are killed by the death angel. Assyria doesn't take the city of Jerusalem. It's going to be it happens 3 invasions. 606, 596, 586. And so, from 606 to 586, you have the big Babylonian boss, Nebuchadnezzar. You've heard about him in the book of Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar invades 3 times, 606, 596, 586. And so you have the Assyrian, I'm going to refer to it as the Assyrian-Babylonian exile. Israel is in exile, not just for 70 years. They're in a 70-year exile in Babylon, that's for sure. And Jeremiah the prophet, Jeremiah 25, Jeremiah 29, would say that. Daniel confirms it. 2 Chronicles 36 hints at it, talks about it. But the Assyrians invaded and took northern Israel long before southern Israel, Judah, went into captivity. You have this elongated exile that rests over the nation from 722, and they feel it. They feel that they're in exile all the way up until really the deliverance doesn't come until Cyrus, a Persian, Medo-Persian king, steps onto the scene about 539. So from about 722 to 539, you're looking at about 200 years. Israel's feeling it. They're not the boss of the world. God has subjected them to the Assyrian, later on in the Babylonian exile. The Assyrian-Babylonian exile. Why is that important? Because God says when the dust settles and the exile, that whole abysmal situation is over. If we could give you a tag that you'd wear at VBS, hello, my name is, and they took that tag and slapped it on the city, you'd watch this city walk up and it'd say, hello, my name is, verse 26, the city of righteousness, a faithful city. That's the prophet imagining, rightly so, that when God has done what he's done, the nation's going to be purged, washed, cleansed. I wonder if there's not a reason then for our evil, our pain, and our suffering. You know, the psalmist said, 119:71, it was good for him to be afflicted that he might learn God's statutes. It says in Job 42 and verse 11 that I know 121 of Job, and I know what people say. And I know that people say, well, Job misspoke when he said that the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. And he got part of it right. The Lord does give, but people say, well, the Lord doesn't take away. And I know that in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, text in 42:11 of Job, listen to this, 42:11 of Job says that the Lord brought the adversities on him. You can't read 42:11 and get anything other than the Lord brought it on Job. That's what the text says. Somebody says, no, the Lord didn't. Text says he did. And that's not a remark from one of Job's misguided buddies, Eliphaz, Bildad, or one of the others. No, Job 42:11 is from the inspired narrator. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, Paul says that God brought the sentence of death on him. Listen to this. God did it? God did it. Brought the sentence of death on Paul so that he might learn not to trust in himself, but on the God who raises the dead. Paul said he needed to learn to trust in God. 2 Corinthians 1, 8 through 10. Oh, and then there's that thorn in the flesh. 2 Corinthians 12, 7. Twice it says it in 2 Corinthians 12:7. It was good for me to get this thorn in the flesh that I might not exalt myself above or beyond measure. Twice he says it, 2 Corinthians 12:7. Somebody says, no, that it says in 2 Corinthians 12, it says that thorn in the flesh was a messenger of Satan. I know that. But I also know this. He calls it God's grace. He calls that thorn in the flesh God's grace. Says it in 12:9, my grace is sufficient for you. Paul calls that, the thorn in the flesh, God's sufficient grace. That is what the text says. Did you know this? The same stuff that the devil can be using for bad, God can have good intentions with. And think about it. Think about how many tests or trials or difficulties we face in life. And while the devil's pulling against us, God's pulling for us. God's seeing this as not a test to try to trip us up. God's using this as a test for us to show out. And let's see if that's not what he's doing with David, Psalm 119:71. Good for him to be afflicted that he learned God's statutes. Let's see if that's not what he's doing with Job. See if he's banking on Job to make a dent in this dark and dying world. You think Job, because of the adversities that God had brought upon him, Job 42:11 now, you think that Job maybe was able to bear God's glory in a new way? Better than his friends ever thought that somebody righteous could bear God's glory? I think that. I've heard preachers say God doesn't cause car wrecks, and God doesn't cause griefs, and God doesn't cause loss. Those preachers are wrong. The text says those preachers are wrong. Now listen to me. Listen to the text, I mean. Listen to this. Do you mean to say that God can't cause what we would term bad, so that he might use us instrumentally to bear his glory in a greater way? You mean to say that if I get in a car accident, and God's using me to relate to other people who have been in car accidents, you mean to say that that can't be God's grace or God's plan, God's big picture for the world, redemption of the world working itself out? You know, I think Romans 8 says something about this. All these things, God is working together for good. God's the active agent there. Those who render the Greek text there on Romans 8:28 in the passive, as though all things are working together for good, and God just has some abnormal knowledge, omniscient knowledge about that. No, that's not what it says. God's the active lead in this. God is the one working everything in the world out for good. And guess who's going to love it? Guess who's going to love God's big picture, his redemptive picture for the world? Those who are the called according to his purpose. You know why that is? Because the people who are the called people of God, this is Romans 8:17 and 18 now at this point, they've fully embraced suffering. They've fully embraced what we would term bad in the world. Car accidents, persecutions, etc., etc., etc. We've embraced that this is part of the world. And we've also embraced that God's banking on us in these difficulties to do something big and noble and righteous with it. And that's God's big picture for the world. It's a misguided view when people come along and they say anything that's bad can't be God's doing. And what they mean by bad is something like this. This is a misdefinition of bad. They mean God can't do or allow or cause anything that conflicts my luxurious health and wealth. Whoever decided what is bad anyway? I hear too many people talking about bad. God doesn't cause bad, and then they go on to talk about what bad is, and it's always something that cuts against their health and wealth. Look, folks, the Bible says God causes things that cut against our health and wealth, and we might wrongly term them as bad, but what if God's got a redemptive angle on these things? What if the psalmist is right in Psalm 119:71? It's good that I was afflicted, that I learned God's statutes. What if those cancer patients were right, who said it was good that I got a cancer diagnosis? I was apart from God. I was distant from God, and if I hadn't gotten that diagnosis, I would have never come back to him. What if it's right that Job says in 42:11 that the Lord brought the adversities and he did it he's banking on Job? And what if Paul's right and says the sufferings of this time, Romans 8:17 and 18, aren't even worthy to be compared with the glory that's revealed in us, Romans 8:17 and 18? And what if Paul was right when he said, God was making me trust in him? What if he was right in 2 Corinthians 1:6 when he said, I needed to be a person who could relate and comfort others in their trials? What if he was right in 2 Corinthians 4:13 through 15? And he said, just like the psalmist, I was a sufferer, but I believed in God, and now I can talk about it to others. What if he was right in 2 Corinthians 12 when he said, that thorn in the flesh that kept me from exalting myself actually has a good means to it then? What if he's right to say, this is actually God's grace? He's keeping me humble. And what if he's right in saying in 2 Corinthians 12:10, and in being weak, I'm actually showing out for God. This is actually God's glory or God's strength or God's power that's being manifested or demonstrated through me. You think the nation here is suffering because God's against the nation? Absolutely not. The text won't allow us to go that way. And in Proverbs 3:11 and 12, used in Hebrews 12, 5 through 12, it says that discipline, while it's not enjoyable or pleasurable, it says that God loves those whom he disciplines or chastens. Do you think that God could cause what we would term bad suffering against our health and wealth? But he's got behind it the biggest, most noble purposes for redeeming a world. I think that, and I know it. The Bible teaches such clearly. What we need to do is get a better definition of what's good and a better definition of what's bad. Did you know the God here that's punishing, disciplining Israel? You know why he's doing such? It's because of his faithful love toward her. If God didn't love her, he wouldn't waste the time, energy, and money in doing what he's doing. He goes the distance for Israel. And I'm one of those who thinks he goes the distance for us. And while sometimes we don't have the vision, the perspective to see it, when God disciplines us, teaches us, humbles us, educates us, all of this in the texts I've just talked about, we discern here a trinket of God's everlasting love and faithfulness to us. I think that. And I don't think that the text will allow us to see it any other way. God has noble, redemptive interests at heart for us. He had them for Israel too. And that's why he's doing what he's doing. No, it's not ideal. Ideally, we'd never need correction. We'd never need discipline. But this isn't the ideal, is it? In this real world, people like Israel and people like we make mistakes. And it's up to God, out of his faithful, enduring, everlasting love, to try to restore us and bring us back. And that's what this text says can happen. The prophet imagines that when the dust has settled, the redemptive, faithful, everlasting, enduring God, who's been faithful all along the way and has disciplined them out of his faithful love, Jeremiah in 29 says something exactly about this. 29, 10, and 11. The God who's been faithful every step of the way will bring the whole thing full circle if Israel, living by faith, will have it. I wonder about us then. And I wonder if God's not trying to gain our attention, trying to spark a fire underneath us, move our hinds ends. I wonder if he's not trying to do all of that with good, noble, redemptive purposes. You know, there was an old Jewish rabbi. I'm going too long on this point, aren't I? I suppose it's beneficial. Old Jewish rabbi, I think it was Abraham Heschel. What, was it Heschel or was it Kushner? Harold Kushner. One of the two. Anyway, one of them talked about God's loving anger or wrath. Loving anger or wrath? Did you know that God never gets wrathful or angry like a child throws a tantrum? Every time God punishes, disciplines, gets angry, gets upset, it's always driven by his love. Did you know that? Did you know that wrath, anger, by the way, is supposed to be transformative in nature? The only thing that ever made God angry was when his love was violated in the first place. That's Kushner or Heschel, one of the two. The only time God ever gets angry is when his love is violated. That's exactly right. And did you know why he punishes? All punishment from God, I'm ruling out at this moment anyway, the retributive justice that we might or might not see in hell. Let's table that discussion for another time. Eternal punishment, I mean. God's punishment in the ordinary run of things, listen to me, God's punishment is always transformative. I'm ruling out the retributive justice on eternal punishment. That's a discussion for another time. I'm saying in this world, in this realm, listen to me, God's punishment is transformative. So why does God get angry or wrathful? Because his love's violated. When he does then, driven by his loving wrath, punish, guess what? It's transformative in nature. Guess what that means? It's loving. God is doing what is best for us. He is loving in doing what he's doing, punishing, getting angry. And I'm saying this, whatever he's doing, He's doing with the intentions of redeeming a world. So let's think noble things of God. Maybe Israel should have done the same. In Isaiah chapter 1, Isaiah imagines when the whole thing has settled, the people of Israel can be retitled. And this is something that the prophets do. They slap names prophetically on everything. Jezreel, Lo Ruhamah, Lo Ami, etc. That's Hosea 1. We'll see it in Isaiah 62 and talk about it then. Here, hello, my name is the city of righteousness, the faithful city. The prophet imagines that when the dust has settled, they can come back home to God and be the people that God's always wanted them to be. Now, number 14. Jerusalem or Zion would be redeemed with judgment and her converts with God's righteousness. All along the way, God's aim is redemption, and it's driven by his righteous, faithful character. Number 14. Number 15. The references to oaks and gardens of which the people would come to be ashamed. In the ideal, looking backwards, the people would say, oh, what were you ever doing being idolaters? What were we thinking those days? Guess what? He says that speaks of Israel's practice of idolatry. Idolatry is your blank on number 15. And then number 16 in your workbook. There will be none to quench them is a remark about irrevocable judgment. There's no pulling back. If God decides he's going to punish, discipline, judge, nobody's going to stand in his way. If he brings a fire on Jerusalem, nobody's going to stop that. God's determined it. He's the boss. His ultimate will is always carried out. Always. His ultimate will is. All right, let's move into Isaiah chapter 2. I'm in 2, 1 through 5, obviously. And let's see if we can go ahead and read it together. We'll pick at the rest of the verses. This is Isaiah chapter 2, 1 through 5. The word which Isaiah the son of Amoz saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. And then we get this oracle, just like Micah chapter 4. More on that in a moment. Now, verse 2, it will come about that in the last days the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established as the chief of the mountains, and will be raised above the hills, and all the nations will stream to it. Verse 3, and many peoples will come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us concerning his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For the law will go forth from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And in verse 4 it says, and he will judge between the nations, and will render decisions for many peoples. And they will hammer their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they learn war. Verse 5 is a transition word. It's going to move us into the next unit. Come, a house of Jacob, and let us walk in the light of the Lord. All right. Let's get some observations about this block, 2, 1 through 5, out here on the table. A, the passage is verbally parallel to Micah 4, 1 through 3. It's verbally parallel. Now, if you look at the Hebrew syntax, it's actually quite different. In the English, if you were to compare Micah 4 to Isaiah 2, they look similar. But oddly enough, the Hebrew texts of the two are quite different from each other. Strange stuff. It's verbally parallel. And what I mean is the concept or the conceptual parallel is striking. It's the same kind of discussion being had, but it's different Hebrew words being used. And that shouldn't shock us per se. But we have a couple of options here. Option 1, 4 of them to be exact. Option 1 is Micah is a little bit earlier than Isaiah and is influenced by Isaiah. Option 2, Isaiah is a little bit earlier than Micah, and Micah is influenced by Isaiah. So one of the two could be earlier and influence the other. That could explain the similarity. Option 3, both of them could be independent from each other and go back even to an earlier source. Maybe Micah and Isaiah both are drawing on a different prophet and it's unnamed. They're not citing him, but they're influenced by them. This is quite similar to what's going on in the Synoptic Gospels. In my estimation, I think Mark is the earliest writer, and I think Matthew and Luke are highly influenced by Mark's earliest writing of the Gospel according to Jesus Christ. The life, the biography of Jesus is probably written earliest by Mark, and the other two are influenced as they write their own records. of Matthew and Luke. The fourth option would just simply be to say, well, there was no source. Micah and Isaiah, writing independent, wrote just, and you just attribute it to inspiration. That's possible, but I would say this. That'd be a fourth option. We just simply say it's inspiration, and God stepped in and just inspired them. That's highly possible as well. But I will say this. Inspiration, our concept of inspiration, doesn't rule out, we might say, human interference or involvement or influence. I mean, if you look at Luke 1:1-4, he explicitly says, I surveyed the apostolic witnesses, I surveyed eyewitnesses, I did a research paper is what Luke 1:1-4 says, as I wrote this gospel. He said, I did my homework. Inspiration was never intended to just give supernatural knowledge to all of the writers. Inspiration is God's protection against human error or fallibility from creeping into the biblical text. So I'm simply saying this. It wouldn't shock me a bit if Isaiah or Micah, one of the two, influenced the other. It wouldn't shock me if they both went back to an earlier independent source. I'm still saying, no matter the case, whatever the case may be, I believe that Isaiah and Micah write by inspiration. I believe the whole Bible is written by inspiration. Clear enough on that. But inspiration wouldn't rule out one influencing the other. So that's a possibility. The second observation we should make, 1b, the context of the passage is given in Micah 3:9-12, and it predicts the ruin of the city and the temple. You'd really want to write down as a reference here in your margin, Jeremiah chapter 26, verses 18 and 19. That helps us with Micah 3. Micah 3:9-12 is helped immensely by Jeremiah 26, 18 and 19. It talks about him, the prophet. It talks about the people kicking around what this should mean. Look at those texts in your own time, won't you? All right, that's a second observation. The context is given in Micah 3. I better actually just read this. Listen to this. In Micah chapter 3, if I can find it, Micah chapter 3, verses 9-12, it says, Now hear this, heads of the house of Jacob, and rulers of the house of Israel, who abhor justice, oh, that sounds like Isaiah 1, and twist everything that is straight. This is verse 10, who build Zion with bloodshed, and Jerusalem with violent injustice. Her leaders, verse 11, pronounce judgment for a bribe. Her priests instruct for a price. That's to say, even the religious fellows are only doing it for the money. And her prophets divine for money. There you have it. Yet they lean on the Lord, saying, Is not the Lord in our midst? Calamity won't come upon us. We're God's people. They think that they've got some arbitrary, unconditional protection from God, Yahweh. Now listen to this, 3:12 of Micah. Therefore, remember, he's a contemporary with Isaiah. They work at the same time. Therefore, on account of you, Zion will be plowed as a field, Jerusalem will become a heap of ruins, and the mountain of the temple will become high places of a forest. In 3:12 of Micah, he imagines the whole city as just being... And then Micah 4:1-3 opens up with the exact same oracle that we get in Isaiah chapter 2. They imagine the destruction of the temple city, and then the mountain of the house of the Lord being set up on the hill. So it's a reversal. This is the imagination of the prophets, Isaiah and Micah. They imagine the nation and the city and the temple being destroyed, and then when the dust is settled, they imagine it going the other way, a reversal. God steps in and redeems the city and reestablishes the temple and the city. That's the picture that we get. All right, now let's weigh in with Jeremiah 26. In Jeremiah chapter 26, now remember, Jeremiah the prophet is about 100 years later. Yeah, about 100 years later. And in Jeremiah chapter 26, verses 18 and 19, this is 100 years later now. Listen to this. The city's still standing. Jeremiah is going to predict the destruction. Babylon, 586, that's when the temple's going to get leveled and destroyed. 586. What's my point? In Jeremiah 26, listen to this. The city and temple are still standing. And in Jeremiah 26:18, Micah of Moresheth, same Micah we just read back in Micah 3, look at Micah 1:1, same fellow, prophesied in the days of Hezekiah, king of Judah, and he spoke to all the people of Judah, saying, Thus the Lord of hosts has said. Now listen to this. He's quoting Micah. 100 years earlier, Micah was. Zion will be plowed as a field, Jerusalem will become ruins, and the mountain of the house as the high places of a forest. That's 26:18 of Jeremiah. They're quoting Micah 3:12, reading Micah 3:12 to say, didn't the prophet say that the city and the temple, didn't the prophet Micah 100 years ago say this was going to happen? Jeremiah 26:19. Did Hezekiah king of Judah and all Judah put him to death? Did he not fear the Lord and entreat the favor of the Lord, and the Lord changed his mind about the misfortune which he had pronounced against them? But we are committing a great evil against ourselves. Their point was this: Micah envisioned the desolation of the city and the temple. And what's the point? Jeremiah's not out of line for saying, and that's what the people of the day were saying, Jeremiah's a false prophet is what they had concluded. He's not God's man. He's non-patriotic. He's no Jewish nationalist. He's talking about the destruction of our city and temple. Imagine if one of us said something about the gutting of the White House or the desolation of the Capitol. Ooh, you're not very patriotic. Treason. You ought to go to jail. We'll throw you in a pit and starve you to death. What they were doing to Jeremiah. And Jeremiah makes the point. If you honor our earlier prophets, I'm not saying anything a whole lot different. Even Micah the prophet said, because of our wicked ways, he was envisioning the temple and the city going down. Let's go back to Isaiah chapter 2. The context given in Micah 3, Jeremiah 26, similar to Isaiah. And so we see Isaiah presenting a reversal of that desolation kind of image. All right, C, 1C. The passage imagines. It's an imagination of what Zion and Jerusalem will be after she has suffered a devastation. All right, listen. Set the workbook aside. Push your Bible aside here for just a second and let me just talk to you. I'm going to give you 3 different options on how we should interpret the prophets, and I'm going to tell you we need to accept 3. Okay? 3 different options. I'll actually write them out for you so you know. If I were in the classroom with you, it'd be on the board. You're going to get so sick of hearing what I'm about to tell you by the end of this quarter, but it's going to help us in Revelation. It's going to help us immensely as we work through Isaiah and through next quarter Revelation. So listen up. The way that the prophets speak, we've got to interpret. What is he doing? Option 1 is the predominant view, or has been up until recent times, the predominant view of evangelicalism. Most of your Protestants, most of your religious folk, your evangelicals, believe in literalism. Let me explain what I mean. In 1941, you know what's going on in 1941, don't you? In 1941, a fellow by the name Walter Kent wrote a song called White Cliffs of Dover. And it went something like this. You look it up right now on your computer on Google, see if I don't get it close to right. There'll be bluebirds over. He wrote a song, 1941. Walter Kent in London writes a song. He's hearing the bombs fall night after night after night from Hitler and the goons. And from a hellhole in London in 1941, Walter Kent writes this song that goes something like, there'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover. Tomorrow, just you wait and see. There'll be love and laughter and joy ever after. Tomorrow, when the world is free. The shepherd will tend to his sheep again, and Jimmy will sleep in his own little room again. There'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover. Tomorrow, just you wait and see. Now, I'm working with Walter Kent's song in 1941. Should we say that when Walter Kent writes this song in 1941, hearing of the bombs falling on the city of London night after night after night, in 1941, do you think he's writing literally to talk about a literal tomorrow? He's speaking the very next day, literally. Do you think when he talks about Jimmy in his own little room and the shepherd tending to his sheep and the bluebirds flying over the white cliffs, do you think he's speaking literally? No. Our second option is to say Walter Kent is speaking allegorically. What would that look like? Allegorically. he says tomorrow, but he really has a specific date in mind, but tomorrow is like a cryptogram. It's cryptic. And it's code. It means, and then you attach a date. He says tomorrow, but he means Hitler's suicide. He says tomorrow, but he means Nuremberg trials. Or allegory would look like, he says shepherd, but he means so-and-so. He says Jimmy, but that's a code word for such and such. Most of your evangelicals take a literalistic view. In our circle, a lot of us go allegorically. And I think that's wrong too. Is that what Kent's doing with his song, White Cliffs of Dover? No, he couldn't do that. He doesn't have miraculous foreknowledge. So obviously, Walter Kent's not writing allegorically. His song isn't an allegory for historical events that are coming in the future. He doesn't have miraculous predictive ability. I think the prophets do. The Bible says as much in 1 Peter chapter 1. But I still don't think that's the way we have to go with the prophets and all these things, for various reasons, by the way. Number 3, I think that we have something like imagination. And they are speaking imaginatively or ideally. Imaginatively or ideally. Walter Kent's not speaking literally. Tomorrow there'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover, shepherd tending to his sheep, Jimmy in their own room again. Walter Kent's not speaking allegorically. Walter Kent, in 1941, with the bombs falling from Hitler, is dreaming. He is imagining. He's thinking of an ideal kind of day. When the Hitler of the day is gone, the oppression is gone, the world's set right again. And he says, with that kind of day in view, tomorrow there'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover, just you wait and see. I think the prophets, just like Kent, imagine a tomorrow when the Sennacherib or the Hitler is gone, and they imagine the kind of day when the world is just free. If I were to ask you, what's your ideal day look like? You might have sleep in, big breakfast, relax in the house, go play a round of golf, go to a nice dinner with the wife, come back home and maybe watch a movie with your wife and just tuck in. And that sounds like an ideal kind of day. But if a couple of those things didn't happen exactly as you imagined them, the kind of day that you had in mind would be fulfilled. And I think that the prophets often throw all of these furniture pieces in. New temple. 12 tribes come back together again. Gentiles are all wanting to be a part of it. They all want to be a Jew now. And they all want to go get snipped so that they can be part of the Jewish nation and proselytize. That's the kind of day that the Jews are imagining. That's the kind of day that Isaiah lays out here. It's the kind of day, just like Walter Kent dreams of, when the Hitler or the Sennacherib is gone and the world is just put right. In Isaiah 2, 1 through 5, that's the kind of picture that we get. It is imaginative. Don't misunderstand me and think that there's no real substance here. God's the one who's promised, but the promise is delivered in the shape of an imagined scenario. Isaiah 2, 1 through 5. Sure beats the allegorical view. Once you start allegorizing, you say, I know it says mountain of the house of the Lord, but it means church. You got to do something with the warfare weaponry. Well, that's a symbol for peace. You can't do this stuff consistently through the prophets. Sorry, but no, you cannot. Let me hit you with one example. You got to see this. Look at Isaiah chapter 11. Look at Isaiah 11. The two texts I'm getting ready to talk to you about, Isaiah 11 and Isaiah 35, I haven't found a single individual, and I read widely for whatever that's worth. I haven't found a single individual who thinks Isaiah 11 or Isaiah 35 is about something other than the Messiah's era. All right, I'm looking at Isaiah 11. Look at Isaiah 11, 6 and 7. It says in 11:1, this is when the shoot, the rod, the stem out of Jesse, the Messiah, the branch, will be on the throne. It's an imagination of the Messiah's era. Watch this in Isaiah 11, 6 and 7. It says in 6, the wolf will lie down with the lamb. And then it says in verse 7, The lion will eat straw like the ox. You guys see that on 11:7? There's lions there. Now they're eating straw like the ox, which is to say something about their being peaceful. But do you see that there are lions in the Messiah's era according to 11:7? Yeah, I'm not talking literally now. I'm not talking allegorically either. I'm saying the imagination is that these lions eat straw like the ox. All right? Drop your ribbon or finger at Isaiah 11. Go over to 35. Look at this in Isaiah 35. Everybody I've read says Isaiah 35 is about the Messiah. Why? Even my heading in my paper copy here says it's Zion's happy future. Guess what it's under? It's under the Messiah. Now watch this. In Isaiah 35:9, look at this line. Isaiah 35:9. No lion will be there. How about that? What's my point? You can't take both of those literally, but you can't take them both allegorically either. If I let you give me, well, lion's a code. Lion's a cryptogram. It means this. You've got a contradiction. Does that make sense? But if we understand that the prophet is just imagining or dreaming, his crossing over himself is not actually happening. No lions being there, 35:9 of Isaiah. Lions eating straw like the ox. It's an imagined feature. What Isaiah is saying is when the Messiah comes, the world's going to be set right. There's going to be peace. There's not going to be violence. There's not going to be ripping apart. And I'm saying that contradiction dissolves when we realize that the prophet is simply just doing some good dreaming with God at his back. What's my point? We need to scrap the allegorical approach to the prophets. It's what's got to be done in order to make sense. I mean, in another place, he's going to say all of the Gentiles are going to be annihilated. That's what the prophets say. I could give you the references. I've got it. Anyway, I'm going too long on this too, aren't I? Some of the prophets say that the Gentiles are going to be completely annihilated. All of Israel's enemies are going to be annihilated. Then you've got other prophets saying that they're going to proselytize and come into the Jewish nation. Is that a contradiction? If you take it literally or allegorically, it is. But I'm saying if you recognize that in both cases the prophet or prophets are just doing some good dreaming, the contradiction dissolves. They are imagining the kind of day when the world is free. They're imagining the kind of ideal day. No work, all play, everything's right and peaceful and joyful. They're imagining a kind of day. We need to scrap the literal and allegorical view approaches to the prophets. They don't hold weight. And the guys who argue that they do hit a trillion different contradictions and don't have a clue how to overcome them. Read McGuigan on this stuff. He is rich. All right, let's take a look at number 1D. The Zion or Jerusalem that had been persecuted by ethnic Gentiles are then imagined as becoming the world's teachers and guides. That's D. 1D. Teachers and guides. It's an imagined feature. It's an imagined piece of furniture. The prophet Isaiah imagines the nation as becoming teachers and guides. It's an appropriate imagination. All of the Jews hear Isaiah and think about the reversal that he's imagining. They say, yep, that sounds right. Same way Ezekiel imagines a temple. Same way that Isaiah 43 and Isaiah 11 imagine the 12 tribes coming back home to that new temple. That's the kind of day. It's a kind of picture that the prophet's imagining. All right, E, the passage is ideal. The passage is ideal and imagines the seed of Abraham as blessing the world. That was always God's intention with the promise to Abraham. Man, we need to study Romans, don't we? And Galatians too. All right, the passage is an ideal one, and I've got some references there for you. F, the passage begins to be fulfilled in Acts 2. And here's what I mean. It's the kind of messianic picture that finally breaks. The Messiah has arrived in Acts 2. The Messiah has been glorified. The death, burial, resurrection, and ascension has all occurred at that stage. Listen to this. This is Acts 3 now. Acts 3:24. Acts 2 says the same thing. Acts 2:16 and 17. This is that which was spoken of by the prophet Joel. You know what he's saying there, right? Acts 2, 16 and 17, he's saying Joel imagined the ideal kind of day. He imagined a day when the oppressor was gone, and he imagined a day when the Messiah broke forth, and he imagined the day when all of the world was set right. And he says that stuff that Joel was imagining, it's happening now. Acts 2, 16 and 17. This is Acts 3:24. Listen to this. 3:24 of Acts. All the prophets who have spoken from Samuel and his successors onward have announced these days. That's what it says. The kind of imagination, the whole conglomeration, the whole corporate, the whole comprehensive deal, everything that the prophets aimed at, the Messiah's era, Acts is starting to say this is the book of fulfilled promises. It's happening now. The passage and the imagination that they're kicking around breaks forth when the Messiah Jesus has arrived and has done his glorified work. Begins to be fulfilled in Acts 2 and following. G. The passage continues to be fulfilled today when people in the world turn to the seed of Abraham, in the Messiah, of course, for instruction of the God of Israel. This is the kind of imagination that the prophet lays out. Any Jew reading this would say, my, that sounds like a good kind of day. And the phrase, in the last days, I should tell you, is a nationalistic phrase. Last days of what? Last days of the nation of Israel. It's the way it's used in Daniel 10:14. It's the way it's used. It sometimes means just a later time. Maybe it means something like that. But I will say this. You look at Daniel 10:14, the phrase is a nationalistic phrase. It's the last days of physical ethnic Israel. And in their last days, guess what kicks off? The Messiah. The Messiah comes in the last days of Israel. He is the consummation of the nation. And so, it's in the last days that the Messiah's era begins. We call it maybe the Christian age. That's not entirely wrong, but we just need to make sure we have the right understanding of it. It's the last days of the nation of Israel, which is the Messiah's era. The last days of the nation of Israel culminates, consummates in her breaking forth, her inauguration of her Messiah. All right, number 2. Micah 4 uses this oracle to speak of restoration after a desolation. I think the typical understanding should be, reading Micah and Isaiah, if we were 7th century BC Jews, and we read Micah and Isaiah, we'd think the villain, the oppressor, the enemy is Assyria. That's what we would think naturally. But it says in Jeremiah 26 that Micah's text more or less gets postponed because the people shaped up. That's what it says in Micah 3. That's what it says in Jeremiah 26. Look at those texts. Jeremiah 26, 18 and 19 again. They shaped up, and therefore they met conditions, and God pulled back from Assyria what he had formerly spoken he would bring. There is such a thing, by the way, as conditional prophecy. Jeremiah 18, 1 through 12. You'd want to read Jeremiah 18, 1 through 12. That happened with Jonah, didn't it? 40 days and Nineveh will be destroyed while the people repented in sackcloth and ashes, and he pulls it back. People of Isaiah and Micah's day, we would typically read this and think the desolation is going to come from Assyria. It ultimately ends up coming from Babylon. Another reason we should speak of the Assyrian-Babylonian exile. All right. Both Micah and Isaiah probably have a doom rendered by Assyria in view. Your next blank is Assyria. However, a doom from Babylon, Micah 4:10. Micah 4:10 explicitly brings Babylon into it, so think about that. And Isaiah's text will do the same, by the way, is as equally relevant, since Assyria and Babylon are both the oppressor, and thereby bear an ontological connection. Ontological means in the nature of a thing. For instance, a triangle, by definition, a nature of a triangle is to have 3 sides and to total to 180 degrees. You can't change that. You can't talk about a 4-sided triangle, and you can't have more or less degrees than 180 in order for it to be a triangle. By the nature of a thing, those are qualities that a triangle has to have. So it is with Assyria and Babylon. They both are in quality. The nature of the two entities is the oppressor, as it's rendered by the prophets. And so Assyria and Babylon are linked up in that they are both the villain, the oppressor. They stand in that tradition, and that's how Isaiah presents them. All right, so with that in view, let's take a look at these blanks on number 3, 4, 5, 6, as we talk about Jerusalem, the ideal. The last days refers to the later days. Daniel 2 renders it as a nationalistic deal. So your first blank on number 3, the last days refers to the later days. Later days would be later than the Mm. Earlier prophets. The earlier prophets are before the fall of Jerusalem in 586. The latter prophets, you read that expression in Zechariah 1, Zechariah 7, the latter prophets come after the destruction of the temple. The phrase is a nationalistic reference to the Jewish Commonwealth. So your first blank is later days, and then 3, the phrase is a nationalistic reference to the Jewish Commonwealth. Number 4, the fulfillment of this oracle is figurative. You will be reminded, just because something's figurative doesn't mean it's allegorical. Both 2 and 3, both of those options, allegory or imagination or idealism, are figurative interpretations. Does that make sense? It is a figurative explanation that I'm giving, but it's not the allegorical one. Keep that in mind. So the fulfillment of the oracle is figurative, and it's experienced in Israel's Jewish Messiah. The fulfillment involves the incorporation of Gentiles. That's always been a feature, by the way, of the Abrahamic promise. Remember what he said to Abraham? In your seed, all nations of the earth will be blessed. That's Genesis 12. That's Genesis 17. That's Genesis 22. That's Genesis 26. And that's the big thing that's picked up not only in Paul's Romans and Galatians too, but it's picked up even in the gospel accounts, and it's especially for our purposes picked up in the book of Isaiah. You look at Isaiah 42 and you look at Isaiah 49, something we'll capitalize on when we get there, Isaiah 40 through 55. When we get to Isaiah 42 and 49, I'll hammer out the point that they are imagining, in connection with the Abrahamic promise, the bringing in of the Gentiles. The servant's work is to ultimately take gospel to the Gentiles. More on that later. When is this going to happen? When is this going to be fulfilled? When Israel's Messiah breaks forth in their nationalistic last days. Guess who that is? It's Jesus of Nazareth, according to the New Testament. And Jesus of Nazareth is the one who does bring gospel even to the Gentiles. This is the prophets and their whole big imagination being fulfilled. Acts is a book of fulfilled promises. And it says everything that Jesus did is fulfilling that big picture, that big collective portrait that Israel's prophets presented. All right. I've got some of everything I've just explained in super length there in the asterisk on 4. Number 5, it needs to be reminded that God always promised that salvation would come through a Jewish Messiah. The Jews imagined their redemption with them being the bosses of the world and Jerusalem being exalted and lifted up and the temple being reestablished. That's an imagination. And always at the center stood a Jewish Messiah. Remember what he told the girl at the well, John 4:22? You don't know what you worship. We know what we worship. Salvation is of the Jews. He said something like that in Romans 11:28 also. Romans 11:28. Number 6, the picture of Isaiah 2:4, judging between the nations, transforming weaponry into peace tools, is about potential. Every individual is given the possibility of being incorporated into this covenantal people of God by faith on the basis of faithfulness, and judgments rendered on the basis of faithlessness. This is some tricky rhetoric. I think the big thing that strikes us about it is it's 8th century BC literature. This is poetry, though. And Isaiah, the prophet poet, like Walter Kent, is imagining. And he's imagining not for some 21st century Westerner. He's imagining for an 8th century BC Jew, where the furniture pieces or the features, like a new temple, an exalted mountain, a new Jerusalem, a city of righteousness, the faithful city, a Messiah, no more war, obliterated Gentiles or proselytized Gentiles, all of those kind of features or furniture pieces find their place in the mind and the hope of an 8th century BC Jew. And that's the way that he speaks. He's using figurative language. You know, some of these guys who take all this literally, John Goldingay, Hal Lindsey, and the rest, these who take it literally want to say that this vision hasn't yet been fulfilled. I think that's absolutely wrong. It is fulfilled when the Messiah broke forth, and the Messiah broke forth in Jesus of Nazareth. These fellows like Goldingay and Lindsey and that whole evangelical view want to say that this vision hasn't been fulfilled I think part of the reason is because they're still off on their thinking. It's never going to go. It's never going to work. And if you take it literally, you're going to have the same problems I raised earlier about some of these conflicting pieces. But we as Westerners don't necessarily like the imagination or the poetry angle. And it's because it's difficult. This is difficult literature. It's not exactly how we relate to literature. And so a number of these guys would charge my view and say that because I'm interpreting figuratively, that's wrong. I would just have to challenge that. And I'd say this. Their view that it's not fulfilled is quite off. Let me give you an illustration to prove what I'm saying. Well, let me give you an illustration to illustrate what I'm saying. Imagine a child in the Victorian era. Cars aren't quite breaking forth yet, but they're working on them. And this father says to his child, "You be a good young lad. You do your schooling. You be obedient to your mama and me. And you grow up and be responsible. And I'll give you your own horse and buggy just like I've got." Oh, the son loves that. His own horse and buggy? Well, 20 years go by. The son's been responsible. He's been faithful. He's done his schooling. He's done everything his daddy said. Made promises. And the daddy says, instead of a horse and buggy, I'm giving you a Rolls Royce. Automobiles have broken forth now. And the son, instead of a horse and buggy, gets a Rolls Royce of his own. It'd be a graceless kid that'd say, well, God hasn't fulfilled, that the father in the scenario hasn't fulfilled his word. He's not been faithful. He hasn't fulfilled his promise. That's the situation we get with the prophets. God is giving them promises in terms to which they can relate, horse and buggy. And when the promises break forth in Jesus the Messiah, and he fulfills them, they show up in the form of a Rolls Royce. Even better than what these children of God had thought or heard in terms to which they could relate years prior. It'd be a graceless kid that'd say God hasn't fulfilled his promises. And I'm saying that God has fulfilled his promises, and we shouldn't be graceless, but accept his promises fulfilled, just as the book of Acts says. If the book of Acts says anything, it says that God has fulfilled his promises. All right, let's move into the next section. Number 7. So we get to, this is a good 3-point sermon. Tough stuff to preach. I don't know that I'd do it, just to be honest. But you've got in chapter 2, 2 through 4, Jerusalem the ideal. In Jerusalem 2, 5 through 4, 1, you've got Jerusalem the actual. The imagination, the high that the prophet is on in 2, 1 through 4, quickly fades away as his eyes come back down to reality in 2, 5 through 4, 1. What's Jerusalem the actual look like? Well, 2, 5, he calls them. In striking contrast to what we just read in 2, 1 through 4. So come on, he says. Come on, house of Jacob. Come on, Israelites. Let's walk in the light of the Lord. Isaiah turns, this is number 7 in your workbook. He turns from the futuristic ideal vision of the era in the Messiah to see the present reality. And you can almost hear him groan or sigh as he writes the words of verse 5. The nation isn't even close to what God's aiming for them to be, as we see reflected in 2, 1 through 4. Everything he wanted them to be, 2, 1 through 4, they're not even close. 2, 5 says that. Number 8. This section, 2, 6 through 9, notes Isaiah speaking to God. 2, 6 through 9 is Isaiah speaking to God. You've abandoned your people, the house of Jacob. But the wider section may not be rooted in a specific historical period. It may be a summary, a composite collective image of the non-ideal, whether under Isaiah, Jotham, Ahaz, and all of that would contrast 2, 1 through 4. I think that's probably right. 2, 6, and following is just, this is the whole era. It is abysmal, is what the text is saying. The people were experiencing, this is number 8, the people were experiencing an economic boom, but they were still following idols, proving that prosperity doesn't prove God's good pleasure. You've got to read these references here in the number 8. 2 Kings 15, 2 Chronicles 26, 2 Chronicles 27. That's background on Uzziah and Jotham. And you'd want to read also 2 Kings 16 and 18 on Ahaz and Hezekiah. It's not pretty. I can promise you that. They're having physical success. Listen to this. They're having physical success, but they're distant from God. That's much the same point I was making a moment ago about suffering and pain and difficulty, stuff we would term bad. It's just the reverse. It's the inverted point of that. Didn't Jesus say something like that? Rain falls on the just and the unjust. Prosperity or the lack thereof says nothing about our status with God. God blesses sometimes, but it's still not the guarantee. That's not the basis upon which we say, I think God's pleased with me. And sometimes God takes away. Oh, yes, he does. We said that a moment ago. And that's not the basis. That's not the reason for our it doesn't comment on our status with or without God. The rain still does fall on the just and the unjust. And God sometimes still does bless, and sometimes God still does curse. And none of that comments on whether or not we're right. The basis has to be something other. Here, the people are having an economic boom, and they're still out with God. In other cases, you've got people going through economic crises, and they're in with God. The Bible says as much. The Bible actually says that in a number of ways, and we've only pointed out a number of cases, only just a sampling a moment ago. Number 9, Israel has been forsaken or abandoned, so says Isaiah. But you know, that idea of being forsaken or abandoned by God still needs definition. In God's forsaking them, if you can even term it that. Now, it says that. It does say that. In chapter 2 and verse 6, you've abandoned your people. We still need to realize God's abandoning them is actually his being with them in the realest of senses. Does that make sense? If God didn't abandon them, he's not disciplining them, he's not chastising them, he's not punishing them. Ultimately, he's not working to redeem his people. God's abandoning them to the Assyrian crisis is actually God's being with them with their real best interests at heart. Maybe sometimes when we wrongly perceive God to abandon or forsake us, he's not with me because of my economic trouble, because of my health trouble, because of my family trouble. Maybe we need to review what it is we mean by abandoned or forsaken. Maybe God's actually, and when we feel like he's abandoned us, maybe he's actually with us the most, with his big picture, his redemptive picture for the world and for us in view. Number 10, had the Jews been infiltrated by foreign diviners or soothsayers? Verse 6, possibly. Maybe they were infiltrated by foreigners. They definitely didn't have a problem getting in bed with them, if you know what I mean. Number 11, the Judean kings were not to trust in horses or gold and silver. Oh, the references there you want to look at. Deuteronomy 17 forbids it to the king. The Judean monarch was not supposed to do four things it wasn't supposed to be. No horses, no multiplying horses, no multiplying gold and silver were 2 of the 4. He had to be from the brethren, number 3, and he shouldn't multiply wives either. Oh, they did about everything they could wrong. They came to trust in everything that God didn't want them to trust in. Foreign powers, wives. That's what the wives were in a lot of ways. The foreign wives, they were political marriages in a lot of ways. Horses, military might. Gold and silver, economy, money. Thank God we never do that. Trust in our politics, our power, and our money and our prestige. Again, you'd think this was written yesterday. Number 12, nobility was absent from all of the people, from the least to the greatest, commoner to the elite. They couldn't find a good man. They were scarce in that day. You'd think this was written yesterday. In view of the historical context, Isaiah insists on God's coming day of judgment in which man will be humbled and God will be exalted. Now here, he's probably talking about the Assyrian invasion, I'd think. Assyria is going to come in and wreck the place, and you'll get a dose of what's really going on. God is still God, and we are still mortal men. That's the point Isaiah is making. You'd think Assyria is the tool here, but this is a timeless thing too. In the context, he's talking about Assyria, but it's timeless. When man becomes exalted, you've got verses like verse 9, the common man has been humbled, and the man of importance has been abased. Or verse 11, the proud look of man will be abased. The loftiness of man will be humbled. The Lord alone will be exalted in that day. He's talking about the Assyrian invasion. God's going to make sure that these people are disciplined out of his love. But timelessly, there's a truth there. And this could be lifted. Richard Hayes is right. Good literature, you can lift out of its original context, transpose it into a different key, drop it in our own laps, and it still speaks the same point. When we lift ourselves up with pride, there's going to come a day of reckoning, a day of judgment. We'll be alone abased, and God will be alone exalted. And that's the point. It's a timeless point. Doesn't matter if Rome's the oppressor. Doesn't matter if our boss at our job is the oppressor. If we need chastised, whatever situation we find ourselves in, God's going to see to it that man is humbled and he, the Lord, is rightly exalted. Number 12, nobility is absent. Man will be humbled. God will be exalted. Number 13, this section, 2:12 through 21, is Isaiah's address to each of the hearers individually. It's his address to each of the hearers individually. God stresses judgment on the haughty, the proud, and the self-sufficient. And you look at Amos 5, fools they were. They were saying, we're looking forward to the day of God, the day of the Lord. No, they shouldn't be. They weren't on God's side, but they acted like they were anticipating God's judgment, his coming judgment. You do realize the prophets are saying, who's going to be judged in the day of the Lord that's coming from Assyria or from Babylon? No, they didn't. They didn't. Number 14, the prophet lists places or objects of security. Mountains, hills, towers, walls, ships, economic success, trading with the foreigners. All of these things, the prophet lists as places of security. And guess what happens? God's going to judge them. There are places where they thought they had security. God's going to judge them. He'll bring their economy down, bring their military down. The whole thing will be a wreck. And God, what's he trying to do? He's trying to get their attention, trying to bring them back. This is God's love working itself out. And they attempt to hide from God's wrath and judgment. You remember some other cases where people tried to hide from God, right? Adam and Eve, Jonah. It didn't go so well. When God decides he's going to love people enough to bring his anger or transforming punishment down, he does what he does, and he does it out of his love. And then, number 14, by noting that some will discard their idols, Isaiah is not speaking literally, but ideally. He imagines a scenario. This is 2 and verses 20 and following. He imagines that when God judges, he imagines the people purged and imagines that they ditch the idols and love God. That's 2:20 through 22. Number 15, some had been trusting in men rather than God, but man is puny and futile. And that's the point in verse 22. Stop thinking about man. Stop being foolish. Why would you trust in man? Trust in God. That's the point that's made in 2:22. This moves us in. We're still in chapter 3. The whole of chapter 3 is still Jerusalem, the actual, and it looks bleak. Let's work our way into chapter 3. As judgment, God takes away food. It says that in 3:1, famine. He's going to cut off their supply of bread, food, and water, so drought. And he also takes away leadership potential. Those who have leadership potential, they're going away in chains. They're headed to Assyria, and it's not a vacation they're taking. They're not going to be able. This is the point that Isaiah's making. You in and of yourselves will not be able to circumvent the oppressor. If they're going to dodge the Assyrian invasion, it's going to have to come through their learning to trust God. That's the point that's being made. All right, number 16. Isaiah speaks, verses 1 through 3. This is a contrast. This is a contrast to her former arrogance. No food, no water, no leaders. You look over at chapter 2, 11, and 12, and they're completely smug in their self-exaltation. 3, 1 through 3 is a pretty stark contrast to the situation of 2, 11, and 12. 2, 9, 2, 11, 2, 12, 2, 22. They think themselves to be something, and God says, I can take it all away. You'll get the lesson then. You'll get the point then. It's not an accident, number 16, but it's designed by God. This is actually, again, I'm repeating the point. This is God's love coming out, though. If he didn't care for Israel, he wouldn't be doing what he's doing. He gives the effort and the time to trying to redeem her. You know, one of the interesting things that's remarked here in 3, 6, and 7 is they are so desperate for leadership that they'll grab anybody who wears a suit jacket, looks the part of the politician or the leader, even if he's as unqualified as the day is long. Oh, you wear a suit, you look good for a leader, let's make him president or king or boss. And they throw just anybody they can find. All of their leaders have been taken off into captivity, is the imagination of the prophet here. Jerusalem the actual doesn't look good. Jerusalem the actual is about to become Jerusalem the judged. And so when that happens, the prophet imagines, you'll look for anybody who can just wear a suit and look the part. Doesn't matter if he's qualified or not. And it says in 3:6, you'll take hold of somebody who's got his father's cloak. Oh, you've got a cloak. You got a suit. You can be our ruler. And God says, you're not going to put me in that position. They won't look to God. They'll look to anybody and everybody other than the one to whom they should look. Should be looking to their Maker, the Holy One of Israel. Isaiah 17, 7 and 8. But instead, they're still bent on doing things their way. Thank God we never do that. Bent on doing things our own way. And so we just won't bow down to God. Jim McGuigan in his book, The Dragon Slayer, talks about us Westerners. Says, we are so bent on doing things sometimes our own ways. We're so bent on beating a dead horse that we'll beat the dead horse and he still won't move. And so what we'll do is we'll get a new whip and we'll whip it harder and it still won't move. And then we're so bent on beating the dead horse, we get a second dead horse and tie it to the first dead horse with a yoke and he still doesn't move. The whole time we need to think about, we need to get a new horse. Israel is bent on going her way, the way of man, and God, they never think of turning away from their dead horse to find a new horse and approaching God in the right way. Number 17. Here, Isaiah declares that the people are reaping their own reward. Verses 8 through 11 says, you've chosen this path. This is why this is happening. Number 18, God speaks the truth that the people are destroyed by poor leadership. Oh, there's a passage in the Proverbs now, isn't there? Maybe 28:19? That sounds right. I think it is. Let me check. 28:19 of Proverbs. Where there is no vision, the people perish. Something like that. 28:19 of Proverbs. If that's it. That doesn't read well in this translation. No, that's not the right verse. Anyway, I'm feeling like it's 28 though. You find it. You find it in your own time. Where there is no vision, the people perish. Proverbs, somewhere in Proverbs. I promise I'm not making up scripture. All right. God speaks the truth that the people are destroyed by poor leadership. Number 18. Number 19. Here not only do the leaders engage in poor leadership, but they also abuse the people in such. Yeah. So they bring their own judgment down on themselves, verses 8 through 11. The judgment that falls upon the nation is because of their own bad choices, and they have poor leaders that they've appointed, 3, 6, and 7. And then furthermore, they don't only suffer the consequences, but the people who are innocent are suffering that fallout as well. This happens in family, this happens in government, this happens in church. Think about it. You've got 3 institutions from God, and in all 3 of those, an abuse can take that very same form. You've got unqualified parents leading the family, you've got unqualified elders leading the flock, and you've got unqualified politicians leading the government. That's called abuse. Again, you would have thought this was written yesterday. Number 19, they abuse the people. Number 20, for Isaiah, even the women aren't exempt from making their contribution to the rot of the people. Whew. Even one individual rightly said, when the women of a society go downhill, the society's toast. That's right. That's exactly right. Well, what do the women do? You look at Isaiah 3:16 and following, and let me tell you, This is the Instagram girl. What are some of these other platforms? TikTok. I think TikTok's becoming pretty filthy. I'm not on it. I have never seen a single TikTok video as far as I know. But I hear it, TikTok and its algorithm is nasty. What's the other one that's basically become a pornography site? OnlyFans, I think it is. OnlyFans. Is that right? I think it's like a pay-per-view. It's basically you pay to watch. You get the idea. That's what's being talked about in Isaiah 3. You would have thought this was written yesterday. Look at it. 3:16 and following. Okay. The daughters of Zion are proud. 3:16. They walk with heads held high, seductive eyes. They mince their steps, tinkle the bangles on their feet. 3:16. That's the kind of girl. That's the kind of woman that's in the city of Jerusalem. For Isaiah, number 20, the women aren't exempt from making their contribution to the rot of the people. It runs all the way through 4:1. You know what he says to them? If they want to be like that, he says in 3:17 and following, judgment's coming to them. They like their hair? Well, guess what? They're going to be bald. That's what he says in 3:17. He's going to afflict the scalp of the daughters of Zion with scabs, make their foreheads bare. They like jewelry? He says, guess what? I'll give them jewelry. As he talks about in 3:18 all the way down through about 3:26, he talks about instead of jewelry, they're going to go in chains to Assyria. Guess what he goes on to say? He says in 4:1, this is not 4:1 of Isaiah now. This is Amos 4:1, isn't it? Amos 4:1, he calls them cows. That's your blank on number 20. The women aren't exempt. He calls Amos, contemporary of Isaiah, same era. Amos calls them cows of Bashan. I don't care what culture you live in. Calling women cows doesn't sit well. Amos calls them that. 4:1 of Amos. And these women are more concerned. Here's a major emphasis that we need to embrace as the Lord's church. The women are more concerned with their image. This is number 20. More concerned with their image than righteousness. God help us when our women at church are more concerned with their image, even if it's a fine image. I'm not talking about modesty here, though there needs to be a discussion about that as well, you understand. But I'm talking about priorities. When we are more concerned, even if we're modest about it, even if it's appropriate and there's nothing sinful in and of itself, when we are more concerned with our social media, or we're more concerned with our jewelry, or we're more concerned with our keeping up with the Joneses, or we're more concerned with our attire than we are with righteousness, something is wrong. And the women here, their priority is far from God. They are not seeking to be godly. What does he say? He says that God will basically make them bald. It's part of the Assyrian captivity. Says that he'll shave them of their pride. And they'll be led into captivity instead of their ungodly materialistic image. The women will stink. Verses 24 and following. They won't have perfume on, he says. It'll be putrid. And then he says this, while the men are dying in battle, the women will settle for any man that will claim them, insisting that they'll not be burdens but take care of themselves. The last blank on 20 is settle. That's what 4:1 says. 7 women will take hold of one man in that day. Ask Eddie Kraft. Go ask Eddie Kraft on the break what his favorite Bible verse is. See if he doesn't say Isaiah 4:1. If he doesn't say 4:1 of Isaiah, remind him of it, and he'll tell you, oh yeah, 7 women will take hold of one man. That's my favorite verse in the Bible. 4:1 of Isaiah. What's the point? All the way from chapter 2:5 through 4:1, we get Jerusalem, the actual. The prophet imagines, because of how abysmal the situation is, he imagines judgment falling upon the people. And in that imagination, the men are carried off, no leaders in the land. The women are carried off, all of these materialistic girls carried off in captivity. It's a bad situation. But remember back in chapter 2, 1 through 5, he was talking about Jerusalem, the ideal. And then he's talked to us in 2:5 through 4:1 about Jerusalem, the actual. Where do you think he takes us in 4:2 through 6? Jerusalem the purged. They can get it right and come back home to God. And the ideal image of this section, 4:2-6, is not necessarily an either or between post-Assyrian crisis or post-Babylonian crisis. The language is timeless. So you've got 3 blanks on 21. He's not just talking about post-Assyrian. He's not just talking about post-Babylonian. This language is timeless. When God judges a people, they can become the purged, redeemed people. And that's as true of Israel in the 8th century BC as it is of you and me now. When God's finished purging, disciplining, transforming us, we can become the purged, clean, pure people of God. There's not a lack of hope for God's people here. They're in a bad situation, but they brought it on themselves, and the God who loves them enough to discipline them and loves them enough so that they might transform and become the people He's always intended for them to be. Same with you and same with me. In 4:2-6, we have a timeless imagination of the prophet, if the people would have it and be purged. Number 22, the branch. You see that in 4:2, the branch of the Lord? The branch of the Lord suggests a remnant thought. Now that word branch, messianic. It's a messianic idea. It's a messianic imagination. It's a messianic concept. And I've got some notes there for you on Isaiah 11:1, the branch, 53:2, branch, Isaiah 6:13 has a similar point. It doesn't use the word branch if I don't remember correctly. 6:13 says there will be a 10th portion in it. There will be a stump. It doesn't say branch, it says stump. The idea, though, is a remnant. It's a remnant thought. But out of that remnant would spring forth a branch. Out of that root, out of that stump, would come forth the branch. And it's a messianic flavor or thought. I've got some notes there. They're technical about the Hebrew linguistics there on the asterisk of 22. Just know that out of the righteous remnant would spring forth the branch, the Messiah. It's a remnant thought, but out of the remnant comes the Messiah. That's where ultimately God's aim blossoms. Number 23, the people are pictured as being made holy again, purified, purged, holy. They're made holy again. And 24, echoing the Exodus. I mean, you can't read 4:4-6 and not get the Exodus idea. Cloud by day, fire by night, glory of the Lord, 4:5. Shelter to give shade from the heat by day, refuge and protection from the storm and the rain, 4, 5, and 6. It's an Exodus thought. Why does he echo the Exodus? This is something that the prophets do frequently. The New Testament does it all over the place. Why echo the Exodus? That was a big event in Israel's history. And what God's doing is reminding them He's redeemed them before, and He'll do it again. But the big time in the Messiah, God's redeeming His people from a far greater oppressor than Pharaoh in Egypt. This time, He'll redeem us from sin. It's a new Exodus that happens in Jesus. It's a new creation, a new temple, a new birth, new worship, etc., etc., etc. Not to say that God hadn't approved any of those old things, but everything that God's aimed at reaches its culmination or consummation, its fulfillment in the Messiah. God recreates, that's your last blank on 24, He recreates the people after the purging, judgment, or oppression. All right, let's get into chapter 5, Isaiah chapter 5. You get this parable, 5:1-7. The parable is 5:1-7. And this parable, if I were to read it with you, I hope you've read it already on your own, sounds similar to something that Jesus does. In Matthew 21 and the parallels in the synoptics, you get this parable of the vineyard. That's a similar deal to what's going on in Isaiah 5:1-7. Look at some of the characters in this parable. Let's go ahead and get the blanks on 4. The friend is none other than Yahweh. Look at 5:1 now. So fill in the blank on 4. The friend is none other than Yahweh. 5:1. Let me sing now for my well-beloved, a song of my beloved concerning his vineyard. My well-beloved, my friend, had a vineyard on a fertile hill. Who's the friend? The friend is Yahweh. Verse 1, look at verse 7. The vineyard of the Lord of hosts. Oh, there it is. Who has the vineyard? 5:1, his friend. Who is the friend? 5:7, the Lord of hosts. He has the vineyard. The vineyard belongs to God. God is the friend. Here's your next blank on number 4. The vineyard itself is the house of Israel. Verse 7. It says that. Verse 7 says, the men of Judah, his delightful plant. The vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel. The men of Judah, his delightful plant. 5:7. So blanks on 4. The friend is none other than Yahweh. The vineyard is the house of Israel. All right, let's go back up to the top of the parable. 5:1. The temporal origin of this parable is unknown, but Isaiah has more or less a song, and he's going to sing it. He's not just a poet. He's not just a prophet. He's also a singer-songwriter, apparently. And it's the kind of parable that we hear from Jesus. That's your blank on number 1. We hear this kind of parable from Jesus in the Gospels. Now, there are some differences, which I'll point out here in just a second. But Jesus later gives us a parable that's quite similar to this. Number 2, the vineyard in the parable has fertile soil. It says that in verse 1. It's fertile. It's on a fertile hill. It's fertile soil, and it also has protection. 5:2. It's dug around. The stones have been taken away. It's planted with the best of the vines. There's a tower in the middle of it for protection. There's a wine vat. It's supposed to produce good grapes, but guess what? This vineyard is useless. It's worthless. And so on number 3, the parable raises an evaluation. There was nothing more that could have been done for the vineyard. It's the best vineyard you would possibly bet on, and it still produces wild grapes. Oh, you want to read in Jeremiah about wild or sour grapes putting the teeth on edge? Pair that up in your own time. Get the references on Jeremiah, the wild or the sour grapes. Maybe mentioned in Ezekiel also. And so you've got this great vineyard. It's the best of the best, and it's still producing worthless, useless grapes. In view of this, number 3, the vineyard would be judged. I mean, after all, you've got a vineyard, and you've done everything that you know how to do it as a caretaker, and it still won't produce. What do? You start over. You wreck the land. The land needs recultivated. Everything needs to be changed. You've got to upheave it. And so on number 3, it's treated like the rest of the desolate, untended land. Even the rain is held back. And the listeners or the readers probably now realize that the parable is of God's relation to the nation. God is doing everything he knows to do for people, the vineyard, and it's still not producing fruit. What's the point? 5:7, Isaiah says rightly, this land is judged. Now, glance over at this with me for a second. Look over at Mark chapter, is it 11 or 12? 12 it is. Look at Mark 12. 1 through 12, really. Mark 12. There's a vineyard, 12:1 of Mark. Everything that's describing the vineyard, 12:1, is taken right out of Isaiah 5, 1 through 7. Vineyard, wine vat, tower. And he's even got these caretakers. And then he sends slaves to check in on it. They kill the slaves. Finally says they'll reverence my son. Sends his son to the vineyard. And what do? They kill him too. Now, interestingly enough, Mark 12 is the parable of not so much the emphasis on the vineyard, it's on the caretakers. 12:9 of Mark is where I am. Jesus says, what will the owner of the vineyard do? He'll come and destroy the vine growers and give the vineyard to others. Oh, there's a striking difference between Mark 12 and Isaiah 5. In Isaiah 5, it's the whole land that's desolate. The whole vineyard's desolate. And the judgment is upon the whole land. The whole nation is corrupt. In Mark 12, Jesus is not making a point about the corruption of the whole land. It's the corruption of the system, the establishment, the leadership. Mark 12:9, Jesus will come and destroy the vineyard, the vine growers, and give the vineyard to others. Matthew 21 says he's going to take it from the fruitless nation and give it to a fruit-bearing people. Faithless Jews are expelled from the kingdom of God. They've never been in, just to be honest, is what Matthew 21:43 is saying. And God's real reign is to find itself with people who are fruit producing. In Isaiah 5, it's a corruption of the whole people. In Mark 12, not all of the people are corrupt. Jesus felt compassion on them, Matthew 9 says, having no leaders, no shepherd. They were like sheep without a shepherd. In the New Testament, Jesus senses a corruption, not with all of the people, but with the leadership. Let's go back to Isaiah 5. The parable of the vineyard speaks against the whole nation that's become corrupt, rotten. Let's work our way into 5, 8 through 23. You know, if the 5, 1 through 7 parable is like Jesus, then 5, 8 through 23 is really like Jesus too. Number 5, there are 6 woes. 6 woes. Can you think of another text in the Bible where there are woes leveled against them? Here's a big one. Matthew chapter 23. Depending on the translation you're using, you either get 6 or 7 or 8 woes. 7 or 8 woes. And Christ seems to mimic that as he addresses the Pharisees in Matthew 23. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees. Woe unto you. Repeatedly he says it. Here, there are 6 different woes. 5a, woe to the greedy. Woe to the greedy, verse 8. Woe to those who just add house to house, field to field, no more room. They just want to accumulate and hoard. Save is not the right word. There's a difference between hoarding and saving. These people are covetous. Woe to the greedy. 5b, woe to those who long after booze. 5, 11, and 12. Woe to those who rise early in the morning. They get up early and they've got a big plan for the day. What's their big plan for the day? Get drunk. Woe to those who long after booze. More on that perhaps on F. C, 5c, woe to those who are callous in their wrongdoing. If you look at 5, 18 through 20, they do atrocious crimes. And guess what? No moral compass. They are callous in their wrongdoing. 5:20 is perhaps the most popular of these texts. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil. It's a bad deal when our moral compasses are wrecked. The Bible talks about in the New Testament, it talks about those who have given themselves over to sensuality. They've become past feeling. Ephesians 4, 17 through 19. Their consciences are seared with a hot iron. 1 Timothy 4, 1 and 2. Here are people whose moral compasses are bankrupt. Woe to those who are callous in their wrongdoing. D, woe to the moral perverts. If you look at 20, woe to the moral perverts. They substitute good for evil, light for darkness, sweet for bitter. These individuals, according to Isaiah chapter 5 and verse 20, are moral perverts. E, woe to those who trust in themselves. Verse 21. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes, clever in their own sight. Woe to those who trust in themselves. And F, woe to the drunkards. More than just longing after booze is bad. I mean, he already critiqued in 5b those who long after the booze. This is their God. This is everything that their life is. That's their priority. Wish I could say I didn't know people like that. I know some people like that. But in chapter 5 and verses 22 and 23, woe to the drunkards. There's more to life than us just wasting our life getting drunk. There's more to us with our lives than just wasting it playing video games. There's more to our lives, more purpose to our lives than just scrolling on social media. There's more to our lives than just aimlessly wandering through life. God's put us here for a purpose, and woe to those of us who are drunkards doing nothing to promote goodness and righteousness in the world. We need to recognize God's put us here for a purpose. A real purpose. He's counting on us to do good, noble, redemptive things in the world. And they couldn't count on the people of Israel. Romans 2 hits them right between the eyes on that point. And I wonder if that wouldn't read the same if it were written of us. Would we be the kind of people like Israel who don't have any kind of purpose or drive or real sense about the world, no redemptive purpose? Or are we drunk on all this foolishness? I could say more about it. I could say more about Christ and how he had an aim or a drive, a purpose for being in the world. And I think when we don't realize that God's put us here for a purpose too, to redeem a world, we're neglecting our responsibility of what God's intended for us. All right, 5:24 through 30. Fire is the symbol of judgment. 5:24, he talks about fire. It's a tongue of fire that consumes stubble. Grass collapses into the flame. What's his talking about fire for? It's the symbol of judgment. I've got some references there for you. It's all over the biblical literature. Fire is the symbol of judgment. Here, the vile, oppressive world falls, and it falls because the people despised or rejected, here's our phrase, the word of the Holy One of Israel. God gives his word, and it's the word of the Holy One of Israel. If you love the Holy One of Israel, you're going to love the revelation that comes from him. You can't love God and then hate his text. Oh, there are some times I read the Bible and I think I don't like that passage much. I really don't want to submit to God on this one. And then I'm reminded that God is trying to reveal to me the best way to do humanity. This is God's roadmap for how to be a human. And God is telling me, this is in your best interest, Drew, that you accept and appreciate my holy revelation. And so even when I don't like it, there are things that the Bible says to me that I really just wish I didn't get on board with. God's saying, I'm telling you, Drew, it's in your best interest. This is me loving you enough to tell you, even if it's difficult, this is what's best for you. This is in your best interest. And then I think, if that's true, I need to be reshaping my views rather than the alternative. If we love the Holy One of Israel, we're going to love his revelation of himself via the holy text. Number 7, God's judgment is expressed as a stretching out his hand. His judgment is expressed. Sometimes you read about God stretching out his hand in the prophets, and it's to redeem or to save. More on that in later parts of Isaiah. But in this case, his stretching out his hand is judgment. And then number 8, the catastrophic judgment upon Israel or Judah is carried out by foreign nations. It's carried out by foreign nations. God in Jeremiah 25 and Jeremiah 29, and also Jeremiah 27, calls Nebuchadnezzar Babylonian boss, and the Babylonians calls them his tool, his servant, calls Nebuchadnezzar his servant. Not because he approves him, he chooses Nebuchadnezzar to be the one who does his task. He uses Nebuchadnezzar as an instrument to judge the people. And it's for their own good that they're being judged. But he uses the foreign nations. One Jew might have read that and thought, more than one Jew might have read that and thought, well, God's apparently favorable towards the foreign nations. It's not his point at all. He's not approving Nebuchadnezzar. He is using them actually because he's got the best interest of Israel, his people, at heart. Did you know he'd do the same thing to Nebuchadnezzar? Why do you think he brought the Persians on them? And why do you think he brought the Greeks on the Persians? And why do you think he brings things on us? He's actually got all of humanity, their best interest at heart. You see, the Bible does say in Romans 8:28 that if we're the called people, we're going to love God and we're going to love his redemptive plan that he's working about in the world. But did you know that God's love for you and me is not at the expense of others? Did you know he's got other children that he loves too, and he's trying to critique and correct them as well? God's aim is redemptive. He is trying to redeem a world. Okay, that brings us through chapter 5. Let's work our way into chapter 6. You know, some of these prophets date their message right out of the gate as they begin their books. Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Daniel, etc. But Isaiah gives us 5 chapters before he ever even talks about his prophetic call. In Isaiah chapter 6, we finally get his prophetic, this is your first blank on number 1, call. It's his prophetic call from God. I don't know why it is that way in Isaiah's book, but it definitely serves to, number 1, identify Isaiah with the people or the nation. And it reminds us that Isaiah was no stranger to the chastisement. One might have thought that Isaiah got a pass or an exemption. But this text is saying that's not true. Isaiah is a man of unclean lips, this text is going to say, Isaiah 6. And it's going to say that he too was purged. His sin was taken away and forgiven, 6, 6, and 7. Isaiah knows not only about personal sin, personal wrong, and identifies with the nation in that regard, but he also knows about the punishment that's coming and the purpose thereof. God help us relate to Isaiah. One individual rightly said, let's not just mouth or say that we have personal sin. Let's believe it. Let's believe it. And I don't mean to say here that I need to say, oh, I always have sin in my life. I'm one of those, for heaven's sake, that doesn't think we sin every day. I think some people sin every day, but I don't think it has to be that way. I'm one of those who doesn't think that God says anywhere in the Holy Text we sin every day. In fact, I think that sin, by the way, is an action and can't be committed apart from sinner. It doesn't exist apart from sinners. Sin is an action and has to be committed by sinners. It doesn't exist apart from sinners. I'm one of those who thinks that we changed our occupation when we entered the Lord Jesus Christ. I wouldn't call myself a sinner now. That's not me saying I don't sin. That's me saying that's a term that I don't wear. I'm not practicing that. I'm not still in the practice of that business. I'm in the Lord Jesus Christ. And you are too, Lord willing. And if we're in the Lord Jesus Christ, we stopped calling ourselves sinner as an occupation a long time ago. But I think we need to admit our downfall. I think we need to admit our shortcomings. And the minute we believe that, we're on the road to success and redemption. And Isaiah first admits his own personal sin, and with that comes the purpose, the perspective of chastisement or discipline. He relates to the nation. He identifies with the nation. Who better than to speak to that nation? Isaiah is a well-selected candidate. He's a well-selected candidate by God. Number 2, the year that Uzziah dies is 740 BC. You go back to the introduction and you see that. Uzziah, in our introduction, our historical assessment there in the introductory, number 20 of the workbook, Uzziah dies. I've got 750, so maybe put 750 down. I think I've got the workbook. I told you 740 a second ago. Put down 750. Uzziah dies in 740 BC. He reigns for a total of 52 years and then dies from leprosy. Let's see here. 792 to 750. He probably is a co-regent with Ahaziah for a good bit of his reign. Anyway, year that Uzziah dies, 750 BC. He reigns for a total of 52 years and then dies from leprosy. 2 Kings 15 tells you about it. It takes a moment of crisis or despair for Isaiah to see the Lord. You know, he had mistaken the king for the king. The real king is Almighty Yahweh, Jehovah, God. And Isaiah can't see the real God, the real king, the real boss of the world, because Uzziah stands in his way. Did I tell you Uzziah? Yeah, Uzziah. You know, I wonder if we don't have things that stand in our way. Some of us can't see past Donald Trump to save our lives, though how that is beyond me. I'll tell you more about my politics later. I voted for Trump 3 times. But how you cannot see past Trump to see God is beyond me. Or some of the others. Some of us can't see beyond our favorite athletes. Favorite university, college football team. Some of us can't see past ourselves. Some of us can't see past our families, our money. In the case of Isaiah, he couldn't see past a physical monarch in Judah to see the real King, Almighty God. You know what it took for him to have his scales come off, that he might clearly see the Lord? It took calamity. Same thing that the nation's undergoing. I've said enough already in this segment, haven't I, about God doing things that we would perceive as bad, but they're for our real redemptive good. In Isaiah 6, what God's doing is he's bringing Isaiah's vision into proper perspective. And maybe he needs to do that with us as well. What would it take for you and me to see the real Lord in his glory? In Isaiah 6, it takes the death of the king Uzziah in 750 from leprosy to see the real Lord. Number 3, this section, he's caught up in vision, prophetic ecstasy, has heavenly beings. Your blank there on number 3 is heavenly beings. It's very similar to Ezekiel 1, very similar to Revelation 4, Revelation 4, Ezekiel 1, and Isaiah 6 all are very similar. There are some differences in the creatures and the number of them and the number of some of their attributes. None of that concerns me. It's a heavenly picture in the oracle in which they're caught up. Number 4, Isaiah here fully identifies with the sinful people. That's what it says in verse 5. He too, just like the people, is a man of unclean lips. He's an unclean person. And so, in identifying with them, he understands what God's doing with the calamity, with the destruction, with the desolation. And now, even though he was no idolater, Isaiah would have never sought after foreign alliances. He wouldn't have worshipped idols. He was still distracted and not fully, here's your blank, trusting in God, but rather the man appointed by God. I hate to say this, but listen to me. I know too many people in the body of Christ. Why, myself, I think I've been one of them once. Who feign self-piety. Who think because they're at church on Sunday morning and Wednesday night, and because they've been dunked in water, and because we don't have a piano in our building, we think somehow that that's sufficient for being pleasing to God. You know, Isaiah was no idolater. He was never, as far as we know, we never hear of Isaiah turning to Egypt or Assyria for aid. We never hear about him multiplying gold and silver and horses. Everything we know about Isaiah is he's a good, fine man. But he was still misguided in his vision or perspective towards God. Couldn't see the real king because Uzziah, the king, stood in his way. Looks that way. Reads that way. He admits it that way. In Isaiah 6, 5-7, he says, I'm unclean. I'm just like the nation. I too need to be transformed. I think sometimes we in the body of Christ need to reflect just like Isaiah and recognize maybe we aren't seeing God appropriately. Maybe our priorities are messed up. Maybe we're not doing what we need to be doing for God. And maybe even though we're good, fine people, we need to recognize we've still got a long way to go and there's growth to be done. Isaiah recognized it. God help us with us too, with our vision and our perspective. God help us with our scales. Let's take them off. And let's see God for who he really is. Number 5, Isaiah's iniquity is taken away in the vision. The angel, the seraphim, takes this coal, hot coal, puts it to his lips, and purges Isaiah, and has his sin forgiven or purged. That's a symbol, by the way. If it can happen to Isaiah, it can happen to Judah and Israel. You know, the Bible never cleans up these guys and tries to paint them into a corner of perfectionism, as though they didn't have their faults and mistakes. That gives me a little bit of hope. Even with my warts and wrinkles, Drew Leonard too can be a man, just like Daniel, just like Abraham, just like Noah, just like Enoch, just like David, just like Paul, just like Peter. Even with all of our struggles, we too can relate to these men of God. It's never been about moral perfectionism. It's about something else. And maybe we need to give the atonement a second look. And maybe we need to understand that part of what's atoning is our transformation into the image of Jesus Christ. Transformation always has stood at the heart of us being people for God. If we're going to be the image of God, we're going to have to transform into such an image. All right, number 6, in chapter 6, verses 8-13. You know, he feels a debt towards God. That's your blank. Isaiah feels a debt towards God. And because God needs somebody to speak to this people, he volunteers, here I am, send me. That's his phrase. Send me. Similar to Paul. I wonder if we're similar to Paul and Isaiah. We see God has a need, I wonder if we'd volunteer quickly and say, here I am, send me, put me where you need me, send me to whatever land you want me to go. And in our day, God's providence is not so explicit or clear now, is it? We don't know if we need to move. We don't know if we need to take a new job. We don't know if we need to, you get the idea. Lots of decisions are gray. I'll tell you this. You just determine you're going to love God, serve Him, and you trust Him, and you pray to Him, and the rest will take care of itself. I think Matthew 6:24-34 says something like that, doesn't it? Number 7, Isaiah is told to go to this people. 6, 9, and 10. Go tell this people. You never want to be this people. This people's not a good remark. They're the people of unclean lips. He says, go tell this people. And using timeless language, that's your next blank, timeless, using timeless language, he talks about the kind of people that's just rebellious, stiff-necked in heart and ears. They close their eyes, they close their ears, they close their hearts. And so it's not shocking that this kind of speech of Isaiah's own people is piggybacked upon by Jesus in Matthew 13, piggybacked upon by Paul in Acts 28. And the word that's used in the New Testament is fulfilled. This is fulfilled. But Isaiah's not making a prediction about Jesus' day. He's not making a prediction about Paul's day. It's a timeless thing. And what the New Testament says about it is, it's happening again. This same kind of people, rotten to the core, needing somebody to preach to them, it's happening again. Number 8, Isaiah's whole message is one of ruin to the nation. Boy, how'd you like to be that kind of preacher? You can take a new job. What's the retirement package? What's the salary? Does it come with a preacher's house? Something you don't want to get involved in, by the way. Etc., etc., etc. No. First sermon, I need you to go and tell the people they're all going to be gutted and judged by God. He's going to do it through this vile nation, Assyria. But Isaiah doesn't just end it there. And Isaiah 40-66 is going to be a whole lot lighter, much brighter, more full of hope. But he says here that there will be a 10th portion remaining after the judgment, a stump out of which the Messiah would spring forth, the root, the branch. And it indicates a remnant thought again. Just like Isaiah 4, just like Isaiah 11, just like Isaiah 53, just like Isaiah 65. Isaiah is sent as a preacher in a very dark situation. And God's banking on him, calls him. I think God, in this dark and dying world, might be, and I don't mean this in the denominational way, but I think God might be calling people like you and me too. Let's see if we can't make a dent in this dark and dying world. Just like Isaiah, let's see if we can't make a dent in this dark and dying world. That brings us through Isaiah chapter 6. Do your readings for next time, chapters 7-12. And we'll study about Ahaz, a little bit about the family of Isaiah, his disciples, the people who were to bind up their oracles. We'll study in Isaiah chapter 9 about some messianic overtones that cut through. Read about Isaiah talking about Assyria as God's axe that will cut down the nation, Isaiah chapter 10. We'll read about in Isaiah chapter 11 God's stem, root, branch that'll come forth out of Jesse's loins. And then in chapter 12, we'll see in that day, when the Messiah breaks forth, where it all will lead. Out of this dark Assyrian, later Babylonian context, there's still light at the end of this dark tunnel. And God constantly nudges the people through the prophet Isaiah to anticipate such a light. And they don't know how long it's going to be. Part of the reason that we get books like Daniel is to remind us that the messianic hope wasn't going to break forth as soon as Babylon phased out. There would still be a few more empires: Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And so part of the reason Daniel's written is because when Isaiah's done prophesying, the people think as soon as we wait out through Babylon, the messianic kingdom's going to arrive. And while the prophets imagine the Messiah as breaking forth, they don't put a time on it. And so people like Daniel came along to say, hey, 4 empires, and then the Messiah. But the Messiah, the hope of Israel, it's always been the aim of the prophets. They've all imagined and spoken of that day. And the people out of a dark situation were awaiting it. Let's study about some of that next time. Isaiah chapter 7. through 12. Do your reading. We'll pick it up in chapter 7.